Good evening. Welcome back to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Saria Strzemska. Iran says it has sent its response to U.S. proposals aimed at ending the war. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, whose government has been acting as a mediator, confirmed the response had been received, but said no details could be shared. To discuss these latest developments, I'm joined by Mark Toth, co-founder of Intrep360. Good evening, Mark. Delighted to have you with us.
Great. Sally, good evening to you and to your viewers.
So we still don't know many details about either Iran's response or the U.S.'s 14-point proposal, but reports suggest it includes sanctions relief and restoring free transit for the Strait of Hormuz. Are we genuinely moving closer to ending this war?
Yes, Sally, it's a great question. The early indications, I suspect not. We are seeing some reporting out of the Wall Street Journal just before I came on air that is basically saying that the Iranians are still playing games when it comes to the nuclear file. They're willing to downblend some portions of it. They're willing perhaps to send other aspects of it to third countries. But they don't seem to be getting to what Trump's red line was, which was to commit completely to dismantling its entire nuclear weapons program. They're balking, meaning they're opposed to dismantling their facilities at Isfahan, Fordo, and Natanz, and one that analysts like me keep highlighting that often gets left out in media reports, Pixac Mountain, which is another deep underground bunker system that they're building to continue their nuclear weapons program. They don't want to dismantle those, and they're refusing to do that. So I think that's why we saw just a little over an hour ago President Trump come out with a fairly angry post on Truth Social, where he was basically condemning Iran for playing games with the U.S. for 47 years and for laughing at us. And then he ended cryptically that they're not going to be laughing much longer. So right now, there's a lot of messaging going on, but so far the signs are not good.
Now, Iran has warned Britain and France against sending warships to the Strait of Hormuz after the UK deployed a vessel to the region. So could these moves increase tensions further, or is this mostly political rhetoric?
Sally, it's a great question. Look, Iran keeps wanting to pick new fights. It's clear enough that their main fight, their principal fight, is with the U.S. and Israel. That's where the kinetic action has come from. But since day one, they've made this intentional decision to go after the Gulf state allies, particularly the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait and Bahrain in particular, a little bit Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states. But now they're wanting to expand this fight, if you will, to France and Britain, who have only offered in a post-ceasefire environment to participate in any efforts to keep the Strait of Hormuz free and open to navigation, on a global basis. So I'm not quite sure why Iran is thinking it's now a good time to pick fights with two countries that have made it very clear they don't intend to become kinetically involved, meaning militarily involved in any joint U.S. action or a joint U.S.-Israeli action. And so it's a little bit puzzling. So I think it's just posturing on their part. They're trying to either show internally, domestically to their own population, that they intend on confronting the great Satan of the West, which obviously, is centered around the U.S., and it could be that they're just posturing for the negotiations. But for the most part, I don't think it will affect it. The UK and France does not have troops in the area that can, naval forces, I apologize, in the area that could change things overnight. And so at this point, I think it's just more rhetoric.
And in the United States, midterm elections are approaching, and polls suggest many Americans believe the war was a mistake. So is Iran better positioned to absorb this economic pressure than the Trump administration is to handle growing political pressure at home?
Yeah, it's another great question. I mean, Iran certainly is betting that the political pressure that it can create on Trump ahead of these domestic midterms in November is one card that they have to play. I'm not so sure that it will work. It's a long time between now, 6 months, until those elections happen. And yes, Americans are growing more angry about rising gas prices, and we all see it, even amongst my own family. We talk about the price of oil or gas going up at local gas stations. That said, Trump has been very clear that he has certain red lines, and the chief red line is that, since 2015, before he became president the first time, that Iran, under his watch, should he become president, was never going to have a nuclear weapon. And I think the fact that we have this lackluster response coming from Tehran today, based on that Wall Street Journal reporting that I referenced, that Trump got angry because he's saying that's not going to, meet his red lines, that Iran has to categorically give up its program. It's clear what Iran is trying to do here, if the Wall Street Journal reporting is accurate, is simply to delay, maybe perhaps even after Trump is then out of office at some future point, but they're not willing to dismantle the program. And so midterms or not, I don't think Trump's going to let that deter him. He's determined now, while he has the U.S. military forces built up in the region, to bring this to a head and to make it clear one way or the other. As he said repeatedly over the last week, Iran is going to give up its nuclear weapons program.
Now, Donald Trump is expected to visit China later this week, I believe on the 14th, while Iran's foreign minister recently also held talks in Beijing. So what role is China trying to play here, and what outcomes are we expecting from this meeting, from this upcoming meeting?
Right. Yeah, that really, Sally, that really is a million-dollar question right now. And again, this is probably too soon, but still my inclinations is that part of Trump's angry response was he feels probably that there was some meddling on the part of China ahead of his trip next week to Beijing. There had been White House suggestions that, look, they wanted to downplay any potential U.S. actions in the Mideast over the next coming days so that it didn't get in the way of Trump's travel plans and visit to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping next week. But, suddenly Trump does come out and gets in the way of that, counseling from the White House that no one was going to be commenting on it, only to comment on it himself. And I think that's telling. I think he's probably, in his mind, maybe a little bit suspicious of what was said between the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi during his visit to Beijing last week, and probably signaling himself to China that, look, he came, he's coming to China to basically talk about U.S. Chinese relations, but if the Chinese want to get involved in messing up his peace talks, if you will, in the Mideast, then Trump's willing to push back. So I have a feeling this message today, this Truth Social post that Trump put out, was, in part aimed at the Iranians, but also in part aimed at Xi to say, hey, I'm coming next week. Decide really what you want to talk about. Don't interfere here.
Now let's turn to Lebanon for a moment, if we may, because reports suggest Israeli operations in the south are increasingly resembling tactics used in Gaza. And Israeli officials have also outlined plans to establish a permanent security buffer zone in southern Lebanon, so basically in place of these destroyed areas. Now, given that the Lebanese government is unlikely to accept any loss of land, how do you see this situation unfolding?
Right. President Trump still ideally wants to get President Aoun, the leader of Lebanon, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu together. That's still a plan of his. You're seeing this come to the forefront, I think, for two reasons right now. Decades since I first stepped in the Mideast myself back in the 1970s, Israel has conducted multiple operations at different times to go up to the Litani River, which is a river in southern Lebanon, to create a buffer zone to prevent Hezbollah from launching rockets on its population, especially in northern Israel, but its technology is advanced also in central Israel, hitting its major cities, including Tel Aviv, which from the Israeli standpoint has become unacceptable. But I think it's also coming from ahead that Iran has made it clear today in its communications with the U.S., been quite a bit of reporting on this, that they still want the war in Lebanon to come to an end. And that's telling. That's telling us that the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, that they want to keep that ally as a check, a strategic check, if you will, on Israel, and that they want to keep that conflict hot in Lebanon. And so I think what Israel is doing is saying, look, if Iran isn't going to go away as a regime, then, and they're still going to be around to potentially support, fund, and train Hezbollah, then they're going to go and start to divide up southern Lebanon into manageable areas, similar to what they did in Gaza, to make sure that the Hezbollah cannot use it as a launching pad against Israel. That said, you're correct. Any kind of overall comprehensive peace settlement, I think the kind that Trump would want to see, isn't going to result in Israeli troops staying in Lebanon permanently. But that's probably the de facto case now, because Israeli troops are already there. They're not quite to the Litani River in all places, but they're getting there.
Elections are also approaching Israel later this year. So how much is domestic politics shaping Netanyahu's strategy in this conflict? And is he likely to stay in power?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It clearly is shaping a lot of Netanyahu's power. I mean, his gamesmanship and calculus right now. He views Iran as unfinished, and partly because it is unfinished. From the Israeli standpoint, the nuclear threat still exists. In terms of the program itself, the ballistic missiles program still exists. The ability to get those missiles and potentially one that's carrying a nuclear warhead to hit Israel still exists, and the drones to a lesser extent, as well as the axis of resistance. So he wants to see that eliminated. But there's immense domestic pressure on Netanyahu for other reasons. And I think the jury's out whether he can survive this or not. Israel is a very divided country right now. And I think the elections, at this point could go either way. And I think most, political pundits, of which I'm not, would suggest that Netanyahu is more likely to lose this election than to win it. But time will tell.
As you've said, Netanyahu says that Iran's enriched uranium stockpile and nuclear sites both must be dismantled before the war can truly end. So the question is, could he try to push the U.S. towards prolonging the conflict, even if Washington is looking to exit, basically?
Yeah, I don't know. Sally, it's a fair question. I don't know if he's looking to prolong the war or simply win the war because he thinks he'd have a better chance of winning his own election. I think winning would give him that best opportunity. But that said, and I said this earlier on Egyptian TV today, this idea that somehow Netanyahu is manipulating Trump into this war with Iran is just wrong. Trump for a long time has made it clear that he's not going to allow Iran to have nuclear weapons, and he's been steadfast on that. Trump's his own man, and to many extent, and I don't say that as a glowing review of Trump, because it's frustrating to many of us that he doesn't take better counsel. But he's his own man in terms of his decisions, and someone like Benjamin Netanyahu, while they may find opportunities to be aligned on certain issues, is certainly not controlling Trump. Trump, for better or worse, is controlling himself.
Now, Mark, one last question before we go. I wanted to talk about the optics, because U.S. officials have told some European allies that deliveries of previously contracted weapons are likely to be delayed, of course, because of the war in the Middle East, and that's according to Financial Times. So how does this affect American credibility in the eyes of its allies?
Yeah, no, it's troublesome because the Pearl program that you're referring to that allows Europe to purchase American weapons for its own use or for use in Ukraine, is now in doubt in terms of whether the U.S. can deliver that. And so, yes, there is a credibility issue there. Having said that, though, from a U.S. perspective, NATO has declined, which is its right to get involved in this. And the U.S. is involved in more than just one region. It's not just, doesn't have just national security interests in Europe, but in the Mideast as well. And the U.S. is deciding that its own weaponry needs to be used, especially if it has to fight Iran on its own for now. But I think there is growing discontent very quickly here before we go in the U.S. that our stockpiles are low anywhere. You've got Senator Mark Kelly today, potential presidential candidate in the U.S., saying he's deeply alarmed that we don't have enough to potentially fight China. And he's looking at both the usage of those weapons in Europe as well as the Mideast and drawing down those stockpiles. So I think it's a legitimate question to ask, but I think the bigger question, the more important one for both Europe and the U.S., is to quickly say we need more weapons. We need to double down and commit to it. Your country's taking the lead on that, and others would be very well, to follow in Poland's footsteps.
But how is this transatlantic relationship developing? I mean, do you see it clearly deteriorating, and what can be done about that? Just before we go. Yeah.
I think it's stretching, Sally. It's a fair question. I hope that it's not deteriorating. The U.S. needs NATO, and NATO needs the U.S. Neither side is capable of potentially fighting a revitalized Russia 5-10 years down the line should they attempt to invade Eastern Europe. And it would be foolhardy, in my opinion, for this alliance to weaken, fracture, or somehow otherwise go away. So at this point, though, I think it's fair to say that it is, there are a lot of ruffled feathers. Both sides of the Atlantic are upset with each other for a lot of right reasons. I think, as I've often said on TVP World, it's just important for cooler heads to prevail here, and that for Washington and Brussels to realize we're in this together, and if we stand apart, we're going to fall apart.
Mark Toth, thank you so very much for joining us this evening. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Sally. Good evening to you and your viewers.
And thank you for watching World Talks. Please stay tuned for more here on TVP World.